right, guys, here we go. 59 one another's. Let's give it up for Daddy D.
Okay, good morning, guys. Well, I've learned as my hair has gotten whiter to try to be in the moment and breathe in good moments. And already in this gym, we've had a lot of good moments. Who would have thought 3 weeks ago when we opened at Cabernet that Cabernet would meet us afterwards and say, sorry, we're closing the restaurant down because we rented it out to Netflix and you all need to leave. Where are we going to go? And, Felix said, hey, follow me. And we came over to the gym. Meanwhile, I was making some calls around town to see what else might be available. But the elders here at Restoration, which is unusual really for a church to allow a parachurch ministry to come in. But they have viewed us online. Some of them have been with us, and they like what we do. They like the table leader concept, so they opened the doors, which is fantastic. And we brought our board, and right in center court right here, we had chairs in a circle. We looked at the gym and said, what should we do here? How should we set it up? And the idea came for the backdrop and the gobo light outside, and ideas were flowing. It was just really neat to do that together. And then last night, 6 guys showed up here to set it up for the first time to get a feel for what it might be like. And then this morning with everybody showing up, it's just, I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful. It's unusual that we can do this as men. And I just pray God's blessings on this place. I pray that we in the years ahead will have, this ministry will multiply. There's so many opportunities we can do with a building this size. And I don't know where to look right now because I used to know where to look to see each one of you. And Walter and Kirby up in the balcony, we couldn't always see. But we were trying to figure out a Cabernet, where to fit, how to expand and go into the other room, and all that's been taken care of. And so we've got, plenty of more room to grow. So feel free to go ahead and invite. This coming week, Ryan and I are heading to Orlando. The convention that we normally have in March because of COVID, we had to reschedule. We had to reschedule it this year. We were going to face a stiff penalty, so we pushed it into October, thinking by then things will settle down. Of course, then the second wave of COVID hit, and we took what was a 600 room block and took the maximum reduction down to 480, and thought, well, people are still not going to want to travel. But Ryan came up with the idea, let's call it family reunion. And the purpose is going to be for our stores just to get together, and we're going to encourage them. Do you know we have over 700 rooms booked for next week? Do you think people need encouragement? Do you think people want encouragement? It's rare. It's unusual. And sometimes we walk right by opportunities to encourage each other. Our stores are asking, we live in such changing times right now. Business is good in our industry, but we have had price increases every 8 weeks. And the supply chain is starting to dry up. Product is not so much available. Our stores want answers to that. So we need volunteers who will come and answer that for them. Right? So our times are changing. They're challenging. It's concerning. It's difficult. What's going on? How far is this inflation going to go? It's troubling, right? Do you think this is a time where we need encouragement? As a husband and as a dad and as a grandfather, as a business owner, as a ministry leader, I look for good moments. I look for times that I can smile. I look for some way to hang hope somewhere today, right? Some stability. Where do we find that? Last week, I was at a breakfast, and the conversation went to what's going on in the world right now. What's going on with our country? Our country almost seems like where it's headed, it won't be recognizable. And one of the guys at the table sighed and said, I'm most concerned about my grandkids. What kind of world are they going to have, right? Anybody relate to that, right? We are in a series of 59, as Ryan mentioned, in the New Testament. God has made it clear that if we follow him, we're his people. And as his people, he has instructions for how we interact with one another. What 59 different directives. We've categorized them into 7 or 8 different topics that we're going to go through. But we are God's advertisement. We are his marketing plan. And so it's important how we interact with one another. We're salt. We're light. He tells us that people will know we're his disciple by how we love one another. And today we're going to take a look at how do we encourage one another. If God had placed us in the first century instead of this century, we would expect suffering. The Jewish leaders hated Jesus, and because they hated Jesus, they would hate you if you decided to be a follower of Jesus. And it got tough. I mean, if you were a follower of Jesus and you owned a business, your business would be boycotted. If you worked for somebody, you'd be fired. If your kids at school, they'd be ridiculed. They began to become isolated. If you were a leader like Stephen, a guy named Saul was looking to stone you. And then, because Satan wanted to crush the start of our Christian experience, he stirred up Rome. And Nero needed somebody to blame for the fact that Rome was falling apart. So he decided to blame the Christians. And so he wanted to take them all out. Christians were being arrested, tortured. And then one of 4 things would happen. You'd be crucified, you'd be beheaded, you'd be fed to animals, or you'd be put on a stick in the street and become a living torch, burnt to death, burnt alive. And so there was a lot of discouragement. And the passages we're going to look at this morning are from Thessalonians and from Hebrews. The church at Thessalonia was a young church, but they were facing stiff persecution. And Hebrews was written by we don't know who. It does not say. But in that book, Paul continually talks about encouragement because Jews were defecting. They decided, yes, they realized that Jesus was the answer, and it started all making sense. But then because of all the persecution, they're like, you know what, I'm going back to my Hebrew roots. And Paul was like, no, don't do that. And so let's go ahead and pull out your table card. Take a look at the first verse, Hebrews 3, verse 13. But exhort one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. Well, I thought we were talking about encouragement. What's with that word exhort? Well, I'm going to give you the shorthand on that, okay? So when Gail Jackson was mentoring me, he said, Ron, here's what you need to realize. Put up your hand. Look at your 4 fingers. As you study the New Testament, this is what God tells us, how we should interact, men, with each other. Number 1, encourage each other. Number 2, exhort each other. Number 3, when necessary, rebuke each other. Hey, you're out of line. That's wrong what you're doing. Get back in line. And then number 4, if absolutely necessary, there's discipline because there's not repentance after rebuke. So what's the difference between encourage and exhort? And by the way, the baseline for all that, the thumb, is love. We encourage in love. We exhort in love. We rebuke in love. We discipline in love. So what's the difference between encourage and exhort? They're kind of twins, okay? Encourage is what we're talking about this morning. And we'll go into that further. There's 3 levels of encouragement. Exhort is, hey, you're doing okay, but you can do better. Take it to another level. Step up your game there. And so what he tells us to do is exhort one another when? Daily. Constantly, guys, as we meet, as you're around the tables, encourage each other and exhort each other. Here's what Gail said. If you're spending time, if you notice yourself doing a lot of rebuking, you're probably out of line. Take a look at that. The main thing is we encourage and we exhort each other. When necessary, we rebuke. And when absolutely necessary, we discipline. So how are you doing? Are you encouraging? Are you exhorting? We're told to do it daily, as long as it's called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. Satan wants to knock you off your flow. He doesn't want you to be salt. He doesn't want you to be light. He doesn't want you to love. He doesn't want you to be walking on your toes with energy. So what is he going to do? He's going to figure out some way to knock you off your game, to compromise. And that's where we need brothers to say, hey, I'm going to exhort you here. You're not flowing. Are you in the Word? Are you on your bench? You're having time with God? Are you flowing? Are you in prayer? Something's not right. I heard you say that. That's off. That's what we need to do for each other. Because left to ourselves, we can talk ourselves into anything. Left to ourselves, we fall back to what world we know. And so, therefore, as we said the first week with the first one another, we need to connect with one another, fellowship with one another, build one another up. And while we do that, we're encouraging and we're exhorting. Look at the second one down. So this is how you do it. After that, we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with those words. How do we encourage one another? That's level 3. I mean, we could almost end and go to the tables because this is the ultimate encouragement. Hey, Jesus is coming. Jesus is at the right hand of God right now. And he's coming back. He's coming back in the clouds. And we're all going to be involved in that. We're going to be drawn up into the air with him. And as he draws us up in the air, he knows your name. He knows exactly who you are. We're going to be part of one of the most amazing things that will ever happen. Jesus' second return. Encourage one another. That's what he says. So, encourage one another with these words. Remind each other. This is what is going to be taking place. Look at 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Therefore, encourage and build one another up, just as you already are doing. We don't have enough room, so I didn't put in what was before that. What did he say before that? Christ died, and he rose again. And whether we are dead or alive when he comes back, we will be joining him. Therefore, encourage and build one another up, just as you're already doing. But we need to keep doing it because this world will swallow us up. It's difficult to maintain an eternal mindset in a very temporal world because in this room we have a lot of guys who do a lot of things, who have a lot of responsibilities, and that stuff swallows us up. And therefore, we need to remind each other of where this is headed. I brought back the rope. Day 1 in the gym, right? What's the rope? For those of you, see, this rope is a picture of our life, of time, okay? So the rope, as you can see, it heads out that side door. And if you can imagine this as a timeline, that rope goes out the door, out the parking lot, down 400, continues on, wraps itself around the planet about 4 times, and then goes out into space and goes on to eternity. That's our life. It never ends. Our life will never end. You see on the end here, there's about 1 inch of red. What does the red represent? This is our time here on the earth, in all of that time. Right now, we live in the red. The red is hard. The red is changing. The red is challenging. The red is concerning. The red is difficult. We can't always see in the red. We need each other in the red. But remind each other that here's what's coming ahead. And Jesus has so many great plans for us here. He knows you by name. He's going to give you a nickname here. Nickname based on what you did for him here. You're going to be given responsibility there based on how you use your time in this little spot here. And so this is truth, and this is what we want to remind each other of. This is what's important. It's not easy here. It's going to end. It's going to end. And then we're going to have all this. And Jesus is coming back. And we're going to be part of that. So, look at Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. Let us consider how to spur one another on to love and good deeds. What's that word spur? Here it is. Our mission statement, spurring men on to a closer walk with God. What's a spur? Any cowboys in the room? Why do cowboys have spurs? Yeah, it encourages the horse, certainly. You take that spur and you put it in the side of the horse, and it directs the horse. The horse knows exactly where to go to get that spur out of its side. And if it doesn't, the spur's going to go in a little bit deeper, right? So we're told, guys, look around your table, spur the guys at your table. Sometimes that can be difficult. Sometimes that means, hey, I'm going to put a little pinch on you right now, man. There's too much going on. There's too much good going on. Spur one another on to what? To love and good deeds. Okay? Maybe you're getting a little bit too wrapped up in the task, in the work. Maybe you're forgetting that it's love and there's eternity involved. Let us not neglect meeting together, as some of you have made a habit of. Not us, we're here, 7 o'clock in the morning, right? But let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. There is a great example of this, and I was debating this morning how to go through it, but Acts 13. It's Paul's first missionary journey. So he heads to Cyprus. He's got Barnabas with him to help him. He's got John Mark to take notes. And they arrive, they speak at the synagogue. They start going door to door to tell Jews that Jesus is the answer to the law and the prophets. And then they move on to Paphos, and there's a governor there, and he wants to meet with Paul. And he wants to hear what Paul has to say, but there's a guy named Bar-Jesus who was a sorcerer. And so if you can picture this, Paul and Barnabas and John Mark all come into the governor's office, and Bar-Jesus is there saying, don't listen to these guys. These guys are deceitful. You don't want to hear anything they have to say. And so Paul looks at him, and he calls out the demon inside of him and says, you are deceitful, you're a liar, you always will be. And because of that, God's going to blind you. And just like that, the guy turns blind, falls on the floor, starts begging for someone to please help him find his way around. And the governor looks at it and goes, I'm with you guys. I'm on your team. And so he got saved because he saw that miracle. And so Paul's first missionary journey starts out in such a dynamic way. And then they go over to Antioch. And they arrive in Antioch, and on Sabbath, they go into the synagogue for the services. And they're reading the law, and they're reading the prophets. And then the priest says, hey, Paul, do you have any encouraging word for these people? Things are so difficult. Things are so confusing. They need an encouraging word. Do you have an encouraging word for them? We don't have time to read it, but please, this weekend, read Acts 13. Here's what would Paul say to them? If that was you, what would you say to them? They need an encouraging word. Okay, level one encouragement. Level one encouragement is, hey, I affirm you guys. I acknowledge what you're doing. Tom, what you do is absolutely incredible. It's unseen. People don't even know how much you do for us. Gary, what you do filming and editing, wow, it's crazy. Table leaders, the extra time that you put in. You're being acknowledged and affirmed. Or someone speaking truth to you. That's level one encouragement. Level two encouragement gets real practical. We're going to go there in a second. It's what God did with Elijah. Level two encouragement. Level three is where Paul took them. Level three is the ultimate encouragement. And so he stood up before them and he said, hey, we'll see if we can summarize it. Basically what he did is he walked them through everything God had done. He said, look, God, he said, look, Jews, Gentiles, everybody in the room, let me tell you, God chose a people, the Jewish nation. He grew them in Egypt. And then he miraculously took them out. And then he tolerated them for 40 years in the wilderness. And when that was over, he threw 7 nations out of Canaan. He put the Jewish people into the promised land. And then he had judges rule, but the people said, we want a king. And so he brought up Saul, and Saul reigned for 40 years. And then he raised up David. And through David's line, Jesus of Nazareth came. You've heard of Jesus of Nazareth. You heard of John the Baptist. We asked John the Baptist, are you the Messiah? And he said, no, it's not me. One's coming after me. Well, it was Jesus. And he explains that to him. And he says, even though our religious leaders put him to death, that was prophesied. All the things we just read here this morning. The prophets all said this was going to happen. And so Jesus was crucified, but he rose again, and we will rise with him. What happened when he did that level of encouragement? This is where we're headed, despite what's going on, despite all the troubles. Get a picture of this. This is what really life is all about. This is what God's doing. This is where we are headed. And so the people said, would you please come back next week and talk about this some more with us? When they came back the next week, you know what happened? The entire city showed up. The entire city showed up. Why? Because the people that there went out and said, hey, you got to come on Saturday. You got to come to synagogue. All the answers are there for us. And what were the answers? Jesus died for our sins. God could have poured his wrath out on us, but he didn't. Our sins are forgiven. Everything we're trying to do by do this for God and do this for God and do this law and sacrifice this, it's all been covered, paid in full, tetelestai, paid in full. How can there be better encouragement than that? We can get dulled down because we've heard it so much, and we begin to take it for granted, and we can lose our first love. And that's why we need each other to say, hey, keep that oil bright. Keep that oil bright. This is fresh. This is new. This is real. This is where we're headed. For all of eternity, we're all going to be there together. What are we going to be doing? What's our assignment going to be? There's no greater encouragement than that. All right, before we go to the tables, let's look real quick at what God did for Elijah in level 2 encouragement, because sometimes level 1's needed. There's nothing like a word of encouragement when you're getting beat up and you feel like, man, I must be a big disappointment to God right now because I just feel like I'm in left field. And some brother said, no, man, the light's still shining in you. Just get it back together. We need that. We're a little word of encouragement. Be an encourager. Look around. As much as you need it, everybody needs it. Do level 1 encouragement. It's important. Level 2 encouragement. What is it? So I'll summarize it. Elijah, you know the story. Even the Jewish people, excuse me, were starting to worship Baal. They were looking for Baal for success for their business, for their own personal finance, for whatever. And so Elijah had enough. He said, all right, let's decide for once and for all who's the real God. We're going to have a contest out at Mount Horeb. All you Baal prophets, get together, call on Baal. Bring fire down from heaven. And he mocked them, and of course it didn't happen. And then he drenches, pours water. Water's a good thing sometimes. He pours water, and then he calls, and God brings down, and it laps up everything. He's on such a high, he outruns a chariot back to tell Jezebel what had happened. He expected her to say, wow, I was wrong. The God of Israel is the one true God. Instead, she said, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to do to you what you did to the prophets. And he went into a depression. And Look at page 3 on the handout. Here's what he said to God. Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors who have already died. He wanted to die. He went from the ultimate peak to discouragement. What did God do? Very practical. And sometimes we need to do this for each other. First, he said, allowed Elijah to sleep. Get some deep sleep. You need a nap. Ryan and I have a little side joke that when sometimes things go well, it's like, hey, you need a nap. Sometimes we just need a good sleep, physically. It'll be encouraging. Take a nap. Get some extra sleep. And then he brought angels and he fed them. Eat. Here, eat, Elijah. Elijah ate. Then the angel said, no, eat some more. Eat. Have a really good meal. Sometimes we need that. Refurbish our bodies. And then God took him to the side of a mountain. And he said, hey, Elijah, you like fire from heaven? You're a dynamic guy. How about this? Wind. Wind blows where rocks are falling, and Elijah realized God wasn't in that. He brings an earthquake, God wasn't in it. He brings fire, God wasn't in it. He does a spectacular show for Elijah. Elijah realizes God isn't in any of it. And then there's a small, still voice. And he realized that was God. And God gave him a one-on-one. So what do we need sometimes when we're discouraged? Sometimes we just need to sleep. Sometimes we need a good meal. Sometimes we need to just get quiet. Hear his voice, one-on-one. And then God said, all right, Elijah, go. Go and find a king. Here's who I want a king, anointed as king. Go anoint him. Go find Elijah. Anoint him to be prophet. He's going to be your replacement. God tapped into Elijah's gifts and said, go use your gifts. He gave him an assignment. So level 1 encouragement is, hey, I acknowledge you. I affirm you. I'm going to speak some truth into you. Pat on the back. Slap on the rear end. Let's go, guys. This is level 2 is physically. Get some sleep. Eat. Go have your one-on-one with God. Get back in the game. Realize God has an assignment for you. He's gifted you. He's got something for you to do. Get yourself back in the game. And in level 3, we remind each other constantly, Jesus is at the right hand of God. He's coming back. And when he comes back, we're coming up with him. We're part of this whole future plan, and it's going to go on forever. All right, table leaders, I'm going to hand it over to you. Let's talk about some encouragement this morning. Thanks, guys. Let me ask you on question 3 at your table, what do you find most people look for in encouragement? What do you find most people look for in encouragement? What did you talk about?
Hope.
Yeah, people look for hope. Sincerity? Yeah, be real, be true, be sincere. Anything? Anybody? Affirmation. Yeah, I think that's really big, right? Yeah. How many guys have a dad? At some point in your life. You know, our dads are intended, ideally, to pour love into us, to train us, to encourage us, to spur us, to rebuke us, to discipline us, to do all those things, right? And so sometimes dads leave a hole. And what's true about most men is that they need affirmation, the affirmation that's been missing in their life, right? And so we need someone to say, hey, you're okay. you're a good guy. You're all right. That's what I find most people actually look for. And so, another thing that Gail taught me is we are to witness at all times and speak when necessary, right? So it's how we listen. It's how we encourage. It's how we love. What we said at tables that people really, what we talked about last week, they're looking for love. Look for someone to love them and accept them. This week our staff, as I mentioned, are going to be getting on a plane for the first time in a long time. And, you forget what it's like, but remember being on a plane and they announce, hey, should something happen, the mask will fall out of the top of the plane. What are you supposed to do with it? Put yours on first, and then if you have a child, put it on them. Well, why would you do that? Because you have to be okay in order to help somebody else, right? So, guys, let me say this. Make sure that you're in a spot where you're being encouraged. To be an encourager, you have to be encouraged yourself, right? And so, are you doing things that allow level one? Meeting, having other guys, encourage and exhort and spur you on. Are you doing level two? Taking care of yourself physically, taking care of yourself mentally, eating, resting, having your time with God one-on-one. And then you're in the game, you know what your gift is, and you're exercising it. You know what God's call is on your life. You're involved in his kingdom work. If you're doing that, you can be an encourager. And then we have the best message, the one that filled the church at Antioch because it wasn't what they were expecting. When I read Acts 13 this week, everything inside me started jumping. I put myself in a story. I'm in Antioch. Here comes this guy, Paul. I'm listening to the law and the prophets. The priest says, hey, do you have a word of encouragement? Yeah, we need it. And what would he say? He could have went to level one. Hey, you all, I give you credit for meeting here. And, he could have went to level one. That wouldn't have filled the church next week. He could have went to level two and said, hey, we've gathered up some money. I've got some things that we can give you something. We can help you out here. And that wouldn't have filled the church next week. What he did is he took them to their roots. He talked about what God's been doing in history. And it was like water on a dry tongue to them. Perspective. Yeah, we're going to go through tough times right now. We talked at our table. Hey, I have a big heart for my son. I have a big heart for my grandsons. But it's not here. It was here at one time. What if you were born during the 400 years that God was growing a nation? You were a slave. Your son was a slave. My grandsons are a slave. When they have kids, they're going to be a slave. Where's the hope? It's not here. It's not here. Same thing's true today. Yeah, our country's changing. Yeah, crazy things are happening. Yeah. And you know what? We also talked at the table. We can be sad about that. We're told when someone dies, that wasn't meant to be. That wasn't God's plan. Sin entering the world was not God's ideal plan. So we're told, yeah, mourn, but not like those who have no hope. Because we can rejoice and celebrate a life because the life goes on and the white goes on forever and we're all going to be a part of that. That's the ultimate encouragement. So we want to take it and we want to love people. We want to encourage them. We want to acknowledge them. We want to affirm them. Everybody around you, be an encourager. And when the opportunity arises, take them to level 3. Let's do that, guys. Let's fill ourselves. It's part of what we do. Here's where we're headed. Next 2 weeks, Hutch will be continuing on with the Moses series. We're going back to Egypt. We're taking a look at one of the most powerful men in the Bible and how did God work through Moses and what as men can we learn from that. And then I'll be back in 3 weeks picking back up again on the 59. So we're going to bing and bang all the way through Christmas on that. Thank you for coming. Thanks for being a part of it. Ryan, I think you've got some maintenance things. All right, appreciate you guys.